about. Like you said, you broke the law by making an illegal U-turn, and I hereby, as a citizen of the town of Mayberry in the United States of America, arrest you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Removing Barriers podcast. I'm Jay.
And I'm MCG.
And we're attempting to remove barriers so we can all have a clear view of the cross.
This is episode 73 of the Removing Barriers podcast. And in this episode, we will be discussing the happenings surrounding the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery and the wisdom or lack thereof of engaging in citizen arrest.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Removing Barriers podcast. Did you know that you could find us on Twitter, Gab, Parler, Facebook, and Reddit? Go to removingbarriers.net/contact and like and follow us on social media. Removing Barriers, a clear view of the cross.
So Jay, we started this episode with a fun scene from the Andy Griffith Show, where Gomer Pyle executed a citizen arrest on Mayberry Deputy Barney Fife. But before we get into citizen arrest, let's talk about the background information surrounding the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery.
Unfortunately, the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery was tragic and there was nothing funny about it. On February 23rd, 2020, Ahmaud Arbery, middle name Marquez, I think I'm pronouncing that right, was murdered in Georgia, Satilla Shores neighborhood. It's near Brunswick, which hits pretty close to home because I actually conducted training in Brunswick quite a few times, stationed where I was for my last duty station. There had apparently been several reports of theft or burglaries in the area. And on that day, Arbery was seen running through the neighborhood, going into houses that were still under construction. And they suspected him of being perhaps one of the thieves, one of the criminals that had been robbing or burglarizing the area. He entered a house that was under construction for all of maybe 5 to 7 minutes, and then walked out and was running and was pursued by 3 men. The first 2 were Travis McMichael and his father Gregory McMichael, who were pursuing him in a truck, and they were armed. And a neighbor who saw Arbery running and the McMichaels following him in their truck decided that he would join in and pursue as well, videotaping the incident with his cell phone. In the cell phone footage that was taken by the neighbor, whose name was Bryan, he goes by Roddy. The cell phone footage shows Arbery running in the middle of the road with the truck that had been pursuing him parked ahead of him. And Travis McMichael gets out of the vehicle, says something to him. It's not clear what he says. And Ahmaud goes around to the right of the vehicle toward a ditch, trying to get away. Travis intercepts him in front of the truck. They have a struggle. They are fighting. And what can be heard next are 3 shots, shotgun shots. Arbery tries to get away, but stumbles and falls face down in the street, having been shot twice in the chest, once in the wrist. His father, Gregory McMichael, had never gotten out of the vehicle. So Travis McMichael was driving. Gregory McMichael was riding in the cab or in the bed of the truck and only came down to approach his son after having shot Arbery. He wasn't the one who actually shot Ahmaud. So anyway, Ahmaud is shot. They call for the police and the police arrive. They take statements. They obviously begin their investigation, but the men were not arrested. The McMichaels and Mr. Bryan were not arrested until 2 months or so later. On May 7th, the McMichaels were arrested and Mr. Bryan was arrested on May 21st. They were charged with several counts of felony murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and some other crime that escapes me. I think attempt to commit a felony or something along those lines.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
The case started under the jurisdiction of a woman named Jackie Johnson. She is, I don't know if it's is or was, but was the DA, the Judicial District DA for Brunswick. She recused herself because Gregory McMichael, the father, had worked for her office for something around the neighborhood of 31 years or 20-something years as an investigator.
Actually, I think it was more like 10 years, and he was a police officer for probably 30 years also.
So he worked for her for quite some time, and she recused herself from the case. However, there's a little bit of a kerfuffle there in the sense that she is currently being accused of obstructing justice or perhaps trying to step in and prevent an arrest and to protect her friend or protect Gregory McMichael. Whether or not he's a friend isn't known, but she's currently being accused of using her power to step in and protect him from the repercussions of having shot Arbery. It's been proven that after the shooting, he did call her and asked for advice or for counsel or for something along those lines. On March 8th, 2 commissioners from Glynn County accused her of trying to use her position and her power to protect the McMichaels. And so that's a whole different thing going on as they investigate that as well. The officers for Glynn County accuse either her or her office of deliberately seeking to prevent an arrest and prevent further investigation of what had happened. Fortunately, thankfully, I should say, not fortunately, thankfully, thank God that the Arbery family and those that represented them continued to push for an investigation. There were obviously many demonstrations that were taking place in order to advocate for justice for Arbery. As I said, the men were arrested on May 7th. Bryan was arrested on May 21st. As of the end of last year, the case has gone to trial, and all of the men were found guilty. Later on in the podcast, we'll go through all of the different verdicts and talk about what are they guilty of. But basically, they're going to jail for pretty much the rest of their lives, more than likely. And that's essentially where this particular story ends. And so perhaps what we hope to do is look at what happened and figure out whether race was involved. What is citizen's arrest? What legal recourse do we have in a situation like theirs? And hopefully we can learn some lessons from the tragic and unfortunate and unnecessary death of Ahmaud Arbery.
Yeah, and here some things that came out in the trial, because the trial happened last year. And some things that are of note, you mentioned Jackie Johnson, where she actually wrote letters and asked to not have both Travis and Gregory McMichael arrested. And as you said, that's a whole different topic as well. But also, it seems like these men, because of their former law enforcement, Travis McMichael had arrest powers in the Coast Guard. His father was a police officer in the Glynn County area down there. So it seems like these men were well known. Well, maybe not well known, but at least somehow have, I guess, strings that were attached that they go by not being arrested for 2 months. And I think if you go back to, because this happened in 2020, so you're going all the way back that time when you have Breonna Taylor happening and stuff like that. That's when all this kind of come to light, when they were pushing Breonna Taylor, and that's just the beginning of George Floyd and all these things. So when that video did come out, whether it was leaked or not, that's when the Georgia Bureau of Investigation stepped in, took over the investigation, and then in a matter of days, issue arrest warrant for these men. And there's some of these things that came out in court, because you mentioned whether or not this was racially motivated or not. And quite honestly, based on what I see come out in court, and of course, when this happened, Georgia didn't have a hate crime law. So evidence to prove racism didn't come out in court. Do I believe this was racially motivated? I have no evidence to say so. But I did see men like Benjamin Crump, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson. Quite honestly, when I see men like those get involved in any shooting that involve a black victim, quote unquote, and white perpetrators, quote unquote, I don't think race. I think race baiting, to be honest, with these men. If these men were not involved, maybe I will say maybe there's some race involved here. But when I see these men, to be honest, I just think here they go again, is race baiting. I could be wrong on that, but I don't think the important thing here is whether he was motivated by race, because what I see came out in court. If you listen to the court cases, and they're on YouTube, the entire court cases on YouTube, you can listen to it if you have nothing to do, whatever. There's hours and hours and hours of court cases. I think this thing went on for like 3-4 weeks. So if you have that time that you can listen to 8 hours, days of court stuff, of course there are breaks in between that you can skip. But their lawyers read Gregory McMichael statement that he gave to the police shortly after this happened. As you mentioned, JD, they mentioned about the burglaries that were in the area, and they mentioned about the string of crimes that were in the area. And if you listen, Travis McMichael, he's the one who pulled the trigger, Travis McMichael. He actually testified in his own defense as well. As I listen to these men and as they explain their thought and frame of mind between why they do this, quite honestly, I don't think that they were trying to execute a citizen arrest. I don't think that was forefront on their mind. I think they did this, and the motivating factor behind this was frustration. Because they mentioned over and over the string of robberies. They mentioned over and over how many times Ahmaud Arbery allegedly went into this house on the construction and get away. And then you must note that this house was on the construction. There's numerous videos of Ahmaud Arbery go into that house. However, we must note that there are many videos of him going into the house, but there's no video showing him actually taking anything from the home. The Sunday afternoon when this happened, he was in shorts, tennis shoes, and a plain white t-shirt. When the camera picked him up first, he was walking. He wasn't jogging at first, like people were saying. He was walking, and the camera showed that he walked on the sidewalk and he went straight into the house on the construction. There are videos that came out in court showing him walking around the home, doing absolutely nothing, maybe just curious, who knows, whatever, but just walking around the home. Then a neighbor, because remember this happened at, I think it's like 20 or 22 Statilla Drive or Shores or whatever the community is, and the neighbor saw him, and when the neighbor saw him, I guess he became spooked and he ran. And as he ran across the McMichael's home, which is at 30 Statilla Shores or Statilla Drive. And as he ran across the home, Gregory McMichael, in his statement to police, said he was sitting in the bed of his truck, mending seat for his boat, and he saw him ran across, going real fast. To use the words of Gregory McMichael that came out in court, Gregory McMichael described Ahmaud Arbery as hauling, and then he used the Bible word for a donkey, across on the sidewalk. He went into his home, and all this came out in court. He told his son, Travis, that the guy is hauling, the Bible word for donkey, and that's the King James Version, down the road. Travis McMichael grabbed his gun, which was a pump action shotgun, and Gregory McMichael grabbed a revolver of some sort, I think, what came out in court. They jumped in their truck and they went after Ahmaud Arbery. They chased this young man over 5 minutes. Travis McMichael repeatedly tried to tell Arbery that, hey, we just want to talk to you. Stop. What's going on? Eventually, they went across William Roddy Bryan home, and he saw them and he joined in the chase or whatever the case may be. And Arbery basically went in a circle, come all the way back round. As he come back around, the McMichaels were above him, and the neighbor, Roddy Bryan, was below him. Whatever happened, I think he tried to open William Bryan's door, whatever the case may be. William Bryan testimony to the police that he tried to block him, corner him, or whatever the case may be. Then Arbery left there and run back up towards the direction of the McMichaels. Travis McMichael at that point is out of the truck, raised his shotgun. Arbery went around the right of the truck, as Jay said, and come around, and both of them meet right there. To me, Arbery was basically defending himself. This was self-defense. If Arbery had a gun and used it on any of these men, I think that would have been justified. I think that would have been the right thing to do, because here are men chasing you. They're not police officers. They don't declare themselves to be police officers. you have a constitutional right in this country not to talk to anybody you don't want to talk to. And they trace him for 5 minutes. And in their words, they cornered, blocked, and even Gregory McMichael, when he was talking to one of the police officers afterwards, they say they trapped him like a rat. Now, these are Southerners, and they use colorful language, so I'm not going to use their language and say the language lead to me to believe is racism. I just think they have colorful language that I probably would not have used, but the motivation behind of this, I don't believe is race. I believe it was deep frustration because of the string of robberies that was going on in the community. But yet, in their testimony to the police officers, they said that they believe Arbery is the person, but they had no evidence to prove other than the videos that show him took nothing. And the owner of the home said that nothing in his house was missing. The owner of the home did mention that he lost some valuables that was in a boat next to the home, but he had no evidence whether that was Ahmaud Arbery who did it. Travis McMichael, the younger, the one who actually pulled the trigger, actually had a gun stolen from his truck, but he has no evidence what is Ahmaud Arbery or not. So at this point, they were going off for, hey, we want to talk to this young man. Travis McMichael did say in court that he actually saw Ahmaud Arbery in that house one evening, and he actually put his headlights on him, and Ahmaud Arbery actually hid from him. That was the first encounter. He said that he reached down in his pants like he has a gun and all these things. Anyway, all this has come out in court, and it has been proven that, hey, Ahmaud Arbery didn't have any weapon on him that day. And the ones who brought the weapon to the fight was the McMichaels, because William Roddy Bryan didn't have a gun. He actually videotaped the stuff on his cell phone. So that's my take on whether it's not his racism or not. I don't think so. I think it was deep frustration on the guy part, but what do you think?
Whatever became of the additional evidence that the prosecutor presented, where he said that William Bryan told him that as Ahmaud Arbery lay dying, that Travis McMichael called him a racial epithet, swearing and using the N-word. Was that ever confirmed, or?
Yeah, I think he actually may have said that. It never came out in court. That was barred from coming out in court, because the weird thing about this trial was that there were three defendants. You had Travis McMichael, Gregory McMichael, and William Roddy Bryan. And I'm no lawyer, and we are no lawyers, but what came out and what came up in the court hearings a lot, and the objection that took place, was based on the Briton Rule. And probably going to talk about the Briton Rule again, but the Briton Rule is basically this. When you have more than one defendant in a trial, you cannot have a defendant who has a right not to testify in his own defense, or to testify if you want to. So basically, the Briton Rule is basically saying that it's almost like hearsay, but defendant B can't say defendant A was thinking something or did something or whatever. He can't incriminate defendant A. Defendant B can't incriminate defendant A. So there were all these things outside of the ears of the jury, where they had to decide. When Gregory McMichael said that we did this, in court they actually read it as I did this, or I was thinking this. Because if he said we, he would be implicating Travis McMichael, another defendant. So that's basically the layman way of defining the Briton Rule. So that didn't come out in court. So he probably may have used a racial slur at that point. Again, I don't necessarily like these racial slurs, but at the end of the day, I'm not quite sure that he can say because he used a racial slur, that means he's racist.
It may not mean that he's racist, but it puts into question whether or not the shooting may have, even in part, been racially motivated. If after you've shot someone and they're on the ground bleeding and dying, and all you can say is the N-word and all of your explicit language, I don't see how the question of race or profiling doesn't come up in this particular situation. I don't think they were chasing him and saying, oh, look, a black man, let's go ahead and chase him down. They might not have. In their mind, Arbery was behaving questionably. But I think back to when I was active duty. I was stationed on the East Coast, and right off base, there was a home, a mansion that was being built on the water, and it was open for anyone to walk into. It wasn't secured or any sort, because it was under construction. And you would have to drive past this mansion on a regular basis to get to base. And I remember just looking at that place and thinking, wow, who lives here? And ooh, what are they building over there? The curiosity got the best of me one Saturday, but I didn't go by myself. I took a fellow Marine with me who was actually interested in that house as well. We just never knew. And we just happened to find out that Saturday. We were talking about the place and we thought, oh, we should swing by and see. We walk in there and it's like walking up to, maybe not quite to Buckingham, but walking up to Buckingham in the sense that the driveway kind of goes around in a circle around this fountain in the middle of the driveway, and the house is huge, but it's open to construction. And we just kind of park our cars and we just kind of gingerly walk up and look around and trying to see what they're building and how many rooms and how big is curiosity got the best of us. And the owner saw us. I don't know if he was in the back of the house, and he was doing it all himself. Had he been anything like the McMichaels, who knows what would have happened to us, because none of us were white. And thankfully, he was very nice. And he said to us, what are you doing here? And we just told him honestly, hey, we're just so curious. This house is huge. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. And we've never seen a house this big under construction. And he's like, oh, yeah, let me take you around. And this is where the living room is going to be. And this is where that's going to be. And there are 3 levels. And this is what we're going to do. And just was real chill about it. He probably didn't have anyone stealing stuff from his house. And so he probably wasn't quite as frustrated as these folks here in Satilla were. But going back to the Arbery story, it should give every citizen pause if you are looking at someone behaving oddly in your neighborhood. And the first thing that comes to your mind is, let's chase this guy down with weapons that are obviously visible for anyone to see, and just say, oh, I just want to talk to you. No one in their right mind is going to want to talk to you when you are so obviously armed. The racial tensions, particularly in Georgia, are rife. You could cut it with a knife. What makes you think he's going to stop to talk to you? He doesn't have to stop and talk to you. He doesn't owe you anything. But as MCG said, you follow him in your truck. He's on foot and you're following him in your truck for 5 minutes. And personally, I don't see how, even if it's a small sliver, considering, and I understand the rule that you just mentioned, but because it's been confirmed that one of the defendants actually said this is what they said, I don't see how race can't be at least considered in small part as a motivating factor, or perhaps a contributing factor, maybe not motivating, but contributing factor to this unfortunate situation.
Yeah, and I wouldn't totally disagree with you. Race could be a contributing factor or motivating factor. I'm just saying that when I see men like Benjamin Crump, Al Sharpton, and Jesse Jackson, I think race baiting. I don't think race.
And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate.
Because of what these men stand for.
That's what they do.
Is race baiting.
That's exactly what they do.
So whether or not, people like Ahmaud Arbery might have well been racial profile. And because these men get involved, for someone like me, I'm going to look at like, I don't believe one thing coming out of these men's mouth, because these men to me are really despicable.
This is one of the reasons why the Black Lives Matter movement, people like Al Sharpton, people like Jesse Jackson, people like Benjamin Crump, and fill in black leader name here. The reason why they're doing not just America, but the so-called black community such a disservice is that they are distorting the real issue of racism so much so that we can't even have a conversation to deal with the real problem, because they see race in everything and they pull the race card for everything. And it doesn't matter if you are as guilty as the devil himself, they're going to defend you and make you a saint. And so people who would like to or see the need to have a legitimate and productive discussion about race relations in the country cannot, because it's overshadowed by and taken over by the race baiting that these men do. It's the same thing with, for example, Black Lives Matter. The exact same thing. The issues that really need to get addressed, the situation that black men find themselves in this country or create for themselves in this country, how it can be addressed, what can be done if there are laws or things that need to change. None of us can really have a discussion about it because of the hyper focus on race, if that makes any sense. So in this particular situation, we have the possibility of race playing some factor, perhaps not principal, but a contributing factor. And we can't even really discuss it because
Yeah.
Benjamin Crump is involved, which is a shame because racism does need to be addressed. Racism does need to be considered, but we can't because Benjamin Crump is there.
But here's some things they need to consider. Travis McMichael, and I think his father, definitely Travis McMichael, because that came out in court, that he has a concealed carry permit. Gregory McMichael, being a former police, I'm assuming he has a civilian version of the concealed carry permit. So these men are men that own guns, have guns, and basically take them everywhere they go.
Are you saying they didn't have to open carry that shotgun? Is that what you're getting at?
No, not just that. I'm not saying that Travis McMichael said the shotgun was between the seat, so no one could actually see the shotgun. And I'm quite sure where Gregory McMichael had his revolver.
But the shotgun was visible when they met in front of the vehicle.
Right. When he came out, he did grab the shotgun. When he was following Ahmaud Arbery, I don't think Ahmaud Arbery could have seen that at least he had a shotgun. But the point I'm making that these men are men that carry gun wherever they go. So the fact that they grab a gun might not necessarily say that, okay, we're going out to kill him. Right?
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
They also confronted a white man who appeared to be homeless, who was fishing under a bridge near, I think it's like Highway 17 or whatever it is down there in Georgia. And they actually got their guns and went and confronted him because they thought he was the guy who was stealing all the stuff from the community. So, they did confront a white guy as well. Travis McMichael had an encounter with Ahmaud Arbery as well one evening when Ahmaud Arbery actually went into the same home that was under construction. So I'm saying all this to say this. I'm not ruling out race because the looks of it, the optics of it, it's easy to say race. Because think about what came out first when this came out. A black man was running, jogging in a community, and 3 white men decided to grab guns and go after him and kill him. That's basically was the story when it came out first. There were no context to the story when it came out. It was more that he was jogging and 3 white men went after him. Even LeBron James went on social media and said, we can't even jog. We're literally hunted down. So again, that probably was some of race baiting when the story first came out. But I'm just simply saying it's easy to find race in this story. But I believe what I saw come out in court, what I saw basically from their initial statement to police, I heard a lot of frustration. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that I hear a lot of frustration in their mind as the reason why they went after it. And that frustration led to what they claim that they were going to do, execute a citizen arrest.
Perhaps when you say frustration, perhaps another point that should probably be brought up is the fact that defund the police movement in this country has generated a lot of frustration in the bosoms or in the hearts of law-abiding citizens, because every night on the news we see looters and rioters and people breaking and entering and police with their hands tied, not able to do anything because those that are in leadership positions have decided that they are not going to prosecute those that commit those crimes, or if they do arrest them, they're released within a matter of hours or a matter of days. It's catch and release. And so that frustration probably has some root in the current state of policing in this country that is a direct result of the defund the police movement.
Yeah, definitely. This is the Removing Barriers podcast. We will be right back.
Hi, this is Jay. MCG and I would like for you to help us remove barriers by going to removingbarriers.net and subscribing to receive all things removing barriers. If you'd like to take your efforts a bit further and help us keep the mics on, consider donating at removingbarriers.net/donate. Removing Barriers, a clear view of the cross. Thank you so much for listening to the Removing Barriers podcast. Make sure to rate us everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Stitcher. Removing Barriers, a clear view of the cross.
So let's tie citizen arrest into this. What exactly is citizen arrest?
Citizen's arrest is, in layman's terms, it's the ability for any citizen to stop or detain someone that they suspect of committing a crime. Now, when I pull up the Georgia Criminal Code, it has to be a suspected felony crime. So armed robbery, burglary, assault, battery, drugs, murder, kidnapping, rape, those kinds of things. But from what I understand, In Georgia, you have to see the person committing the crime. You cannot simply suspect the person of committing the crime. And so citizen's arrest is the ability of any citizen to detain someone that has been caught or seen or that has been observed committing felony crime. You kind of keep them in place and hold them there until the cops get there. Now, from what I understand and from what I've read, the question of whether or not citizen's arrest is still needed is questionable. Maybe back in the day when the country was maybe 25, 50 years old, however old it was, maybe 100 years old, back in Laura Ingalls days, when the magistrate or the lawyers or the judges only make their rounds to the areas every so few months or maybe even once a year, who knows? And if there were a crime committed, it would be the citizens who would get together and perform that citizen's arrest. Today, you call the police, they're there in like 5 minutes. Of course, minutes don't matter when it's seconds you really need, but generally, you pick up the phone, you call 911, the police are there within 5 to 10 minutes. Whether or not citizen's arrest is still needed today is a question that has been brought up as a result of this particular trial of this unfortunate situation, because, as I said, there's a question as to whether or not it's still needed.
Yeah, and Georgia did change their citizen arrest laws because of this.
It's already been changed?
It has already been changed. But I'm going to read what the Georgia citizen arrest law was when this happened. And according to fine law, it said, in certain situations, private individuals have the power to make an arrest without a warrant. Actually, this is the definition of citizen arrest. These types of arrests, known as citizen arrests, occur when ordinary people either detain criminals themselves or direct police officers to detain a criminal. While arrests by private citizens are subject to fewer constitutional requirements than an arrest by law enforcement officers, there are still rules apply. Failure to abide by these rules can result in civil and criminal liability for the arresting individual. So that's according to fine law, that's what citizen arrest is. Is it still needed for today and what these men did and all these things, kind of tie everything together here? So according to fine law, again, he said a person can arrest someone that they reasonably suspect of committing a felony, even if the felony did not occur in the presence of the individual making the arrest, as long as the felony was actually committed and the individual making the arrest knew of the crime. A reasonable suspicion about the identity of the perpetrator will justify the arrest. However, if the crime did not in fact happen, the person making the arrest could become civilly and criminally liable. In general, people can't use citizen arrest for misdemeanors unless the misdemeanor involves the breach of the peace. Even in these circumstances, however, individuals can only make arrests when they personally witness the criminal behavior and the breach has just occurred or there's a strong likelihood that the breach will continue. So, according to fine law, they're saying, hey, if you're going to make a citizen arrest, you better be sure that this crime happened. And it's interesting because we need to tie Georgia law in this as well, because what it was before is that you actually have to have immediate knowledge of it, then you can make a citizen arrest, and you only can trace the person if the crime that the person commit was a felony. So therefore, the McMichaels had to see Ahmaud Arbery commit a felony to chase him, to legally be allowed to chase him.
But they didn't.
They didn't. It came out in court that Gregory McMichael was actually sitting in the bed of his truck, mending seats for his boat, and he saw Ahmaud Arbery running past him. He recognized Ahmaud Arbery as the guy who he's seen on videos that have been entering into homes. He went in and get his son, they grabbed guns and they went after him. There's no point that he came out in court that you actually saw Ahmaud Arbery committed a crime that day. They kept on going back to the fact that they saw him in there and Travis confronted him. They saw him on video. In Gregory McMichael's own words, he was talking to a police officer. This was before the incident. He was talking to a police officer. He was talking to the owner of the home under construction. They were all just talking and saying how much of a pest, quote unquote, this guy is. And when the owner told him that he hasn't taken anything, he said, well, it is a criminal trespassing. Criminal trespassing in Georgia is a misdemeanor. So the only thing they really saw Ahmaud Arbery commit on that day they didn't say anything, but before that day, was a criminal trespassing, which is a misdemeanor in Georgia. So you cannot chase for a misdemeanor. You can chase for a felony. So because they didn't see anything, that make the chase of Ahmaud Arbery illegal.
I find it hard to imagine with Gregory McMichael's police background and with Travis McMichael's at least some exposure to that they wouldn't have known that. So I wonder if it's the frustration that just got the better of them, or was it that they feel like because of their background, because of their police training, that somehow perhaps their heads were inflated and their ego got the best of them. And I can't imagine being in law enforcement and not knowing that requirement, especially when they say they were trying to commit a citizen's arrest. It seems that you would know what citizen's arrest actually is, when you can do it, how you can do it legally, if these are lawmen.
Yeah, quite honestly, there are nuance around this because there are not a lot of if this, then that, if this, then that in the code that was before. Because I remember listening to the trial and the prosecution and the defense interpret that law differently. What I just gave was the prosecution interpretation that you only can chase if there's a felony. The defense actually have the two clauses actually kind of different. They're not two different clauses, the same clause, but it's almost like a good example is like the Second Amendment. When you say a well-regulated militia be necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A lot of people separate, the militia and the right of the people to keep and bear arms, kind of separate them. Gun people and 2A people kind of put everything together and say the militia are the people, and people that don't believe it, so the militia is not the people. It's a situation like that you kind of have with this kind of clause where the defense is saying, hey, they had a right to chase, and the prosecution is saying, hey, they don't have a right to chase. And because the law, what do you mean by immediate? The Constitution said we have a right for a speedy trial, but we have seen people wait 2-3 years before they go to trial. So, it's the ambiguities of the English language, because you say you have to have immediate knowledge. What do you mean by immediate knowledge? The law didn't define immediate, just like this Constitution didn't describe speedy. So it's a situation like that. I personally believe that the version the prosecution gave, because when I read it, that's the sense I get, that you have to have immediate knowledge. That means you have to be happening right there, right then. You can't see the person a day or two later and decide, oh, I'm going to execute the citizen's arrest on you because 2 days earlier you did this. The law doesn't seem to give you that permission. But the defense seems like they were arguing something along that line. So did these men know the law? They probably did, but they probably just didn't interpret it the way the prosecution and hence the jury interpret it.
That's a danger then in the citizen's arrest. That's a danger then, because if that's how they interpret the law, what's to say that they're wrong, especially if it's not clearly defined? And so if you tack that along with the frustration and along with perhaps the ego that may come from being armed or having a police background, that makes citizen's arrest in today's world quite a dangerous thing, because you end up with a dead person. I'm not saying that Arbery was perfect, but he certainly is the victim in this situation.
Oh, yeah, I would agree. And I do believe that these men, just by what came out in court, the fact that they went and confronted a guy that was fishing because he looked homeless and he had a lot of things around him because there were a lot of burglaries and stuff like that going on in the community. These men are men that, quite honestly, the gun people say that if you wouldn't go there without a gun, don't go there with a gun. So if you're going down the road and you wouldn't go down the road without a gun, don't go down the road with a gun. So definitely, I believe there's some ego that was here. There's definitely a lot of frustration that was here. So I'm not defending these men. I hope it doesn't come across like I'm defending them. These men are men that I believe that they were just frustrated and they had the means, aka a gun, that emboldened them to confront somebody. Because I honestly believe that if they didn't have a gun, and I'm a 2A guy, I think people should carry their gun if they have a gun or whatever the case may be. I don't have a problem with people having guns. But I honestly believe that if they didn't have a gun, they wouldn't go after Ahmaud Arbery. So, of course, normal people like you and me who are not lawyers, it's always a danger to take the law in your own hand. And even if you're a lawyer, it's still a danger to take the law in your own hand, because at the end of the day, in this country, it comes down to what 12 reasonable thinking people believe. So even if they interpret it like, hey, I can go after him because I've seen him commit a crime or I've seen him commit a felony or whatever. At the end of the day, 12 reasonable people, quote unquote, didn't believe them. Those are the dangers of citizen arrest, because let's ask the McMichaels, let's ask Roddy Bryan, would you do this again?
Oh, I'm sure they wish a million times that they could redo this. I'm sure.
Of course. So then being criminally liable or civilly liable for whatever happened, you're talking about jail time. You know, Travis McMichael was convicted on 9 counts. 1 count of malice murder. I think it was like 4 counts of felony murder. And then you have some
aggravated assault
charge in there.
Kidnapping or attempted kidnapping.
False imprisonment.
I mean, they're burying him under the jail pretty much.
If they don't win an appeal, he's 35. He's going to be there for 40 more years, 50 years before he go on. His dad is 65, so his dad's probably going to slip on a banana peel anytime soon and probably go. Not making light of that. I'm not simply saying this dad already lived most of his life. He is in the middle of his life.
Right.
And back then he had a 3-year-old son, which is probably 5 now.
Yeah.
I'm just simply saying,
nobody wins here.
Is it worth it that you went after this guy with a gun because he stole something? It's not like Ahmaud Arbery was in the community. I'm not defending Ahmaud Arbery because Ahmaud Arbery wasn't a saint neither. But let's say Ahmaud Arbery was the one who was committing all these crimes in the community. There's no evidence that he was the one who did all these things. I do believe that he did some of them, but that's neither here nor there. But let's say that he did all of these crimes that were going on in the community. He didn't kill anybody. He didn't hurt anybody, so to speak.
It was all misdemeanor.
Not physically. He was stealing.
Yeah, even if you're stealing, I don't think that's reason to be chased down.
It's a reason to be frustrated.
Frustrated for sure.
I understand, because quite honestly, I've never really had anything valuable stolen from me. So I don't know the frustration. But
you can imagine.
Yeah, I can imagine that I would be frustrated if someone took my stuff. But to grab a gun and go after that person, take the law in my own hand, I don't know.
Under no circumstances does the law permit you to kill someone to defend your stuff anyway.
Well, except if you live in Texas. But I'm just simply saying, what they did wasn't wise. What they did wasn't prudent. It wasn't moral. It wasn't sane. It wasn't the reasonable thing that a reasonable, rational person would do. Say, hey, here's this guy running in my community, obviously running from the home that he always going into. Let's go after him. I think most people would call the police and let the police handle it. Or if they're going to follow, they're not going to confront. But these men not only grab guns, they follow, they confront. As I said earlier, I honestly believe that if Ahmaud Arbery was armed that day and he took out all 3 of these men, he would have a right to self-defense. Because if you reverse this, I think this is probably Kyle Rittenhouse 2.0. Because let's say Ahmaud Arbery was the one who actually shot these men. I think Ahmaud Arbery could have claimed self-defense. Because these are armed men chasing him, literally, for 5 minutes.
Sure.
So I believe he could have claimed self-defense here. So the danger of citizen arrest, I don't think it's too dangerous to go after it. That's why we pay police officers to go. I'll be a good witness, but I am not chasing anybody, especially chasing anybody with a gun.
The McMichaels tried to claim self-defense after the shooting, but I believe it is self-defense law that you can't be the aggressor and claim self-defense. As MCG said, they followed Arbery in the truck for 5 minutes, got out of the truck and confronted him. From Arbery's perspective, these men are, what are they going to do? Stop and ask me for a cup of coffee? No, these men are confrontational. They are seeking to, at least from Arbery's perspective, seeking to attack. They're threatening, they're menacing. Arbery defended himself, and you could see in the video that he got some good swings in there. But unfortunately, that's no match for a shotgun. Travis McMichael claimed self-defense because Arbery tried to reach for his gun. Now, anyone who is a self-defender of any type or of any sort will agree that if someone is trying to take your gun, it's reasonable to assume that they're trying to take the gun so that they could neutralize you with it. However, if you're the one pursuing the person, you're behaving in a menacing type of way, you are the aggressor. If he grabs your gun, that's not him behaving in a menacing way or in a threatening way. That's him defending himself. And I'm glad that the jury agreed.
Oh, definitely, because, as I said earlier, I believe Ahmaud Arbery would have a right to defend himself by using deadly force on these men. And was it wise to say Ahmaud Arbery run and fight a guy with a gun? No, but in their own words, they trapped him like a rat.
So what are his options?
I will give anybody...
They would say fight or flight, but you can't flee anymore.
Well, the argument could be made that when he went around the right of the truck, he could have kept on going
toward the right?
Right, rather than circle around. That's true, but they could have stayed in their home too. That kind of brings me to something that came up in court over and over again, is the but-for clause, because the reason why the neighbor was tried as well is because, the way I understand it, because it's a but-for clause. But for his involvement, Ahmaud Arbery would have escaped. It's like the if.
Oh, like if it wasn't for...
Right, so got it. Like when we say if this, if that. And his defense lawyer did bring up a good point. We can but for this to death, but for Ahmaud Arbery not being in the community, but for the McMichaels didn't chase him, but for... We can but and all these things to death. But the facts remain that, in their own words, they trapped him like a rat, and when he defended himself, they shot him.
He fought back and they shot him. And there were 3 rounds, 2 to the chest, 1 grazing round to the wrist. Now, I'm not sure if the grazing round to the wrist was also one that hit him in the chest. So there were just 2 shots fired. But when I watched the video, I heard 3 shots.
I think there were 3 shots. Of course, I think it was buckshot, so...
Good night.
I'm not quite sure.
At point blank range. He didn't have a chance. He was dead before he hit the floor, I'm sure.
So I'm not quite sure. I know one of the shots actually went through a window in a neighbor's home, but I don't want to say miss because, I guess he was so close, the shots didn't have time to spread. So maybe he missed one, but I know there's one shot that he got shot under the shoulder or like under the arm. I think one was in the abdomen or something like that, but I don't know where the third one went, but maybe that one missed.
You mean a round went into a neighbor's house and they didn't charge him for that? I mean, if they're going to throw the book at him, they may as well charge him for that too.
Remember initially...
Endangerment wasn't Rittenhouse accused of endangering McGinnis because... Was it McGinnis or who?
No, it was the jump kick man.
Oh, no. That was considered...
No, that was jump kick man.
Endangering him? Shooting him?
Yeah, there was 6 or 5 charges from Rittenhouse and they dropped the gun charge.
Oh, okay.
So, but I think it was...
All right.
I think it was jump kick man. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. They've been found guilty.
Matter. I guess in that
they're going to be in jail for a long time. So, but still, I didn't realize that around. See, now that's dangerous. You are firing your weapon, which demonstrates that the McMichaels, of course, they were fighting for the gun. If you're fighting for the gun, you probably shouldn't be pulling the trigger because you have absolutely no control where the muzzle is pointed. One of the cardinal rules of gun safety is to treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Never point your weapon at something you don't intend to shoot. I don't know if that was a miss or if that's just him panicking and pulling the trigger, wanting to get something done or scare him away. But if it went into someone else's house, now you're not just going after Arbery, you're going after with such a blind rage and a blind, maybe not blind, but just a rage to where you're endangering other people. So This whole idea of frustration, as you brought up, is clearly demonstrated in that. Yeah,
but in all this, let's say the McMichaels, we know that, they're the one who started this, they started running, but let's talk a little bit more about Roddy Bryan, because what he actually did was got involved in a third-party situation. Well, you can argue that the McMichaels actually got involved in a third-party situation because Ahmaud Arbery ran out of a neighbor's home, not their home, the neighbor's home that was under construction, not their home, and they got involved. Then Roddy Bryan got involved with the chase that they started. So we already established that it's not wise necessary to execute citizen arrest. I would say that it's wise to execute citizen arrest maybe under a very few unlimited circumstances, like you're defending an elderly from someone who's beating them up, and without a shadow of a doubt who's the aggressor, who started this, and you're getting involved. Something that is so egregious that is shocking to the soul that it doesn't make sense that you don't get involved. But even that, take that with a grain of salt. Make up your mind what you want to do. But getting involved, because Roddy Bryan actually got involved here. So they're kind of tied together. Citizen arrest, getting involved. What do you think?
This one's tough for me because I am one to think that if you see something happening, you should get involved. However, this whole idea of not my circus, not my monkeys, there's some wisdom there too. Getting involved in a situation like that with people who are hot-headed, who are obviously not necessarily in control of themselves, that's not wise. And so I don't know if Bryan was trying to be a good neighbor. I don't know if he had a chip on his shoulder or there was some frustration there as well. But in this particular instance, he should not have gotten involved. At the same time, had he not gotten involved and taken the video, they would have never, I suspect, they would have never been charged. They would have never been tried. They would have never been found guilty because the only reason, from what I understand, I could be wrong, the only reason that they pursued this matter was because he leaked his own video. And when they saw the video, they were like, hey, wait a minute. And they decided to go ahead with legal proceedings. So on the one hand, he shouldn't have gotten involved. On the other, if he hadn't, it would have been the McMichaels versus a dead man. And there probably would not have been justice for Arbery at that point had he not gotten involved.
Yeah, dead men tell no tales. But at the same time, the but-for clause, maybe Ahmaud Arbery would have gotten away.
Another thing to consider.
So, sure. But, we have a saying in the Caribbean, don't trouble unless trouble you. It's the same thing as not my circus,
twister.
Not
don't
my monkey.
Trouble unless trouble troubles you.
And that's exactly what Roddy Bryan did. He trouble, but trouble didn't trouble him. So my rule for me personally, I'm not going to trouble unless trouble me. So if you're going to come into my home uninvited, that trouble is troubling me. So I'm going to trouble back. Mm-hmm. But in many circumstances, my rule is going to be not my circus, not my monkeys, unless I know that this is so shocking to the soul. Let's say, for example, earlier last year in Philadelphia, they came out that a lady was being raped on a train and with people watching.
That's crazy to me.
I don't think I could have sat around and not get involved with something like that. That is something that's so shocking to the soul that even if you don't try to stop the guy, you call the police, something. Or in Florida, there's this guy, he wasn't all that dear in terms of his sanity, but he went into a retention pond, walking and drowned, and there were a group of young people, 16, 14-year-old kids, taunting him and told him they're not going to help him. They could have called the police. There's something you're going to probably want to get involved in. But for most things, two people arguing on the side of the street, two people arguing in Walmart, two grown fit men fighting. Don't get involved. Call the police, separate yourself, be a good witness. For most things, don't get involved. But maybe stuff that is so shocking to the soul that you can't sleep at night if you don't get involved, maybe, but weigh the cost. Weigh the cost, because I can bet you that Roddy Bryan is sitting in jail right now.
Oh, wishing.
And this is going over in his head.
Over and
over.
He
said he could have just stayed in his garage and keep on doing what he was doing that Sunday afternoon and not got involved. Most things, God forbid, but I'm not planning to get involved in almost nothing. It has to be so shocking, involve kids or involve the elderly, that I'm like, okay, I need to get involved in this. And for most things that I might get involved in, my involvement might be pull out my phone and call 911. Maybe some things I might have to get physically involved, but that is even lower on the percentage poll. That stuff, I'll quickly call 911 rather than get involved physically. Because especially in this country where it's so easy to be sued and it's so easy to be, all these laws and clauses and stuff like that.
Everyone has to make that decision for themselves. I remember telling you a story of a little bit of a social experiment that was taking place. There was a child crying at the front of a grocery store near the door. And a man walked up to the child, saw the child crying, and stared at the child, looked like he was thinking about it for a second, and then walked away. And a journalist who saw the entire encounter pulled him aside and asked him, hey, you saw that child crying. Why didn't you help that child? Because later on, a woman came and helped that child who had been separated from his mother, I think. His mother, I'm pretty sure. Maybe her mother. Either way, the journalist asked him, why didn't you get involved? And he said, are you kidding? If I help that kid, now I'm a kidnapper or child rapist or this, that, or the other. I could be so easily incriminated, so easily accused. It's easier just to walk away, which is sad, but that's the reality of the country that we live in right now. As you said, so easy to be sued, so easy to be accused of something that you didn't do.
And even if you get off, Even if you get off,
your life is ruined.
Just being prosecuted. We're going to have
prosecution is the punishment.
Yeah, we're going to have an episode on Kyle Rittenhouse verdict, but just the weight of being prosecuted is enough. And then the societal casting as a black sheep, you know. Let's say these men got off. Where they going to work?
Lives are ruined. The lives are completely ruined.
You're going to have to go in hiding for a while because Target going to be in their back and all these things.
As I say, nobody wins here. A young man is dead. His family is devastated. 2 men are going to be buried under the jail, particularly if they don't win their appeal. They're going to be buried under the jail. One, you could say, has already lived a full life. He's just going to live the remainder of his life behind bars. But Travis McMichael is a father of very young children. Those children are now pretty much fatherless. They're going to be raised without a father. His family is devastated. Nobody wins here. Nobody wins here.
Yep. This is the Removing Barriers podcast. We will be right back.
This is the Removing Barriers podcast. If the podcast or the blog were a blessing to you, leave us a rating and a review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to share the podcast with your friends. Removing Barriers, a clear view of the cross.
So Travis McMichael was found guilty on 1 count of malice murder, 4 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault, 1 count of false imprisonment, and 1 count of criminal attempt to commit a felony. Gregory McMichael, Travis' father, was convicted of all except the malice murder. William Roddy Bryan was convicted of all except the malice murder, 1 of the felony murder, and 1 of the aggravated assault charge. All these men, except the case is not overturned on appeal somehow. One thing we need to understand about appeals and stuff like that, especially when a jury has found you guilty, an appeal is not going to retry the case. The appeal is basically checking that the law was followed,
faithfully carried out
correctly in the case. So it is very hard to win an appeal in a jury trial. I know that William Roddy Bryan make several motions for mistrial during the trial because they were, as I said, Jesse Jackson was in the court one day. There were demonstrations outside of the courthouse.
Why would he even?
And he made some statements there and he asked for mistrial because the demonstration, he believed that the jury can hear the demonstration outside when they're in their jury room and stuff like that. None of that was proven to be true, but all these separate motions for mistrial that were made, and there were several of them, in terms of the prosecution brought in some evidence and stuff like that, that it was kind of determined during discovery that these shouldn't be brought in, kind of murky waters kind of way. They make a motion for mistrial there as well. So there are definitely some areas here that a lot of motions that were made for mistrial that an appeal would definitely have to look over. So is there a possibility? Yes, but from what I understand, it's very difficult to get an appeal. But, you know, I would say definitely, I don't think Jesse Jackson and all these guys should have been there. But as I said, the jury has spoken and these men have been found guilty, at least Travis McMichael of all counts, and the other 2, at least on felony murder, is just enough alone to put them away forever. And they have found several counts on them. But I would say before you start beating your chest and think that you're better than these men, because of course, as I said, it was frustration, it was ego, it was a lot of things that I believe motivated these men to go after Ahmaud Arbery. And I'm saying that based upon the evidence that I heard read in court when they transcribed the police interview. And these were like pages of them recounting to the police what happened, telling them what happened. And when these were read in court, what I gather from what I'm hearing is frustration. What I gather from what I'm hearing is ego. What I'm gathering from what I heard was, hey, I have a gun, I'm going to defend myself if something happened. So the fear of confrontation is removed to some degree in my mind, what they're saying, because they have a gun. But before you go beating your chest thinking that you're better than these men, who according to the outcome of the case are murderers, we too one day will stand before a judge. These men stood before a judge, they stood before a jury, and they were found guilty. One day, we will stand before the eternal judge. And you will not have a presumption of innocence. These men, when they were in court, had a presumption of innocence, and the prosecution had the burden to prove that they were guilty. When you stand before the eternal judge, you will not have the presumption of innocence. You will be guilty with no way to be proven innocent. The Lord will be the judge and the prosecutor, and the jury, the one who will hand down the verdict. And you will stand before him guilty unless you're found in Christ. I think about the situation in Luke chapter 13, verse 1 to 5, where the Bible says, "There were present at the season some that told him of the Galileans, whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Suppose ye that these Galileans were sinners above all the Galileans, because they suffer such things? I tell you, nay, but except he repent, he shall all likewise perish. Or those 18 upon whom the tower of Siloam fell, and slew them. Think ye that they were sinners above all men that dwell in Jerusalem? The Bible says here again, I tell you, nay, but except he repent, he shall all likewise perish." The Bible makes it clear that when you stand before the eternal judge, that except that you repent, you shall all likewise perish. Except you be found in Christ. As I said, we're not innocent until proven guilty. We are guilty and cannot be proven innocent. We can only be declared innocent when we are in Christ. The Bible declares in 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 21, "For he had made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him." We can be declared innocent, listener. We can be declared innocent. But it's only if we repent and turn to Jesus Christ in repentant faith. We will end this episode by playing the judge reading the verdict for Travis McMichael, Gregory McMichael, and William Roddy Bryan. And do me a favor. When the judge say Travis McMichael or Gregory McMichael or William Roddy Bryan, imagine that was your name. Put your name, your full legal name that the government will call you by, in that space. And hear the judge say, guilty, guilty, guilty.
I'm going to go ahead and address each one of these verdict forms separately. First verdict form I have is the state of Georgia versus Travis McMichael. Mr. McMichael, please stand. Verdict is as follows. In the Superior Court of Glenn County, state of Georgia, the state of Georgia versus Travis McMichael, case number CR 000433. Jury verdict form. Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 2, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 3, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 4, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 5, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 6, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 7, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 8, false imprisonment. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. Count 9, criminal attempt to commit a felony. We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis McMichael, guilty. As to Gregory McMichael, in the Superior Court of Glenn County, the state of Georgia versus Greg McMichael, case number CR 2000433. Jury verdict form. Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, not guilty. Count 2, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 3, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 4, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 5, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 6, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant, Greg McMichael, guilty. Count 7, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant Greg McMichael guilty. Count 8, false imprisonment. We, the jury, find the defendant Greg McMichael guilty. Count 9, criminal attempt to commit a felony. We, the jury, find the defendant Greg McMichael guilty. As to William R. Bryan, in the Superior Court of Glenn County, State of Georgia versus William R. Bryan, case number CR 2000433, jury verdict form. Count 1, malice murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan not guilty. Count 2, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan not guilty. Count 3, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 4, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 5, felony murder. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 6, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan not guilty. Count 7, aggravated assault. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 8, false imprisonment. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty. Count 9, criminal attempt to commit a felony. We, the jury, find the defendant William R. Bryan guilty.
We are all guilty before God, except through the grace of Jesus Christ. Would you trust him today? Thank you for listening. To get a hold of us, to support this podcast, or to learn more about removing barriers, go to removingbarriers.net. This has been the Removing Barriers podcast. We attempted to remove barriers so that we all can have a clear view of the cross.